I'm Earl Franks, Executive Director of the Council for Leaders in Alabama Schools, and I'm very fortunate today to have as my guest Dr. Tommy Bice, State Superintendent of Education for the state of Alabama, to talk about something that is very important to him and I know he's very passionate about, and that's Plan 2020. Why Plan 2020? Tell us a little bit about the driving force behind this.
Sure. When I had the honor of being appointed as state superintendent, one of the first things I wanted to do was take this opportunity to recalibrate where we want to move in public education. I'm a firm believer that to get to new heights and expectations for kids, you need a clear vision of what that looks like multiple years down the road. So we put together the plan that has as its foundation a redefined high school graduate, and then the 4 components with measurable objectives on how we wanted to get there, that we then share with local school systems and invite them to engage into that plan wherever it's most appropriate for them.
So when did you start formulating the plan, the vision for what is now Plan 2020?
Sure. Immediately beyond being appointed. I was appointed officially in November and started the job in January of 2012. Really between the November date and January is when I began pulling data together, pulling information together, talking with individuals and groups about what would a plan for Alabama look like if we really focused on ensuring that kids graduated from high school ready for whatever comes next.
So going back to your days as Deputy State Superintendent, had you already been thinking about some of these priorities as a deputy?
Absolutely. You know, none of the things that are included in this plan should really be a surprise to anybody. They're things that most of us in leadership positions have talked about for a long time. We just didn't have one place where they all came together with a very clear focus of what the outcomes would be, with measures so that we could know as we moved along, is what we're doing effective? If not, what are we going to do about it? And really an ability to engage a broader community, especially business and industry and people who get our kids to be part of the process.
Right. So how was the plan developed? And I have it here in front of me, and it's quite extensive. Tell us a little bit about the development of the plan, who all was involved in that.
Sure. We engaged any and everybody we could find that wanted to be part of this, from education groups, but probably as important, if not more important, we really reached out to the people who receive our graduates, spent a good bit of time with community colleges, spent time visiting with 4-year institutions, and specifically the faculties in arts and sciences, and with business and industry, a big part with business and industry, asking one simple question to every one of those groups. What is it about Alabama high school graduates today that appears to be lacking compared to the expectations you have for those students?
Walk us through the timeline. Just give us a general overview of the timeline from when the plan was first initiated to the culmination, I assume, which will be in 2020.
Sure. You know, it began, like I said, been pulling things together for several years, but really in a more formalized fashion between November and January of 2012, 11 and 12, began to engage the state board about the need for something very specific and very aspirational for our students based on what we were seeing across the country about making sure our kids were competitive, not just at the state level, national level, but internationally. And very quickly pulled those pieces together, engaged those different groups, and had the plan in place and ready to go by February, March of 2012.
So the timeline moving forward, are there some major goals along the way that you can kind of just hit the high points with?
Absolutely, and let me just use graduation rate as one of them, because that's a real foundational piece of this whole thing that is shared not only by K-12 but by the whole stakeholder group. Is in order to make sure that we're on target of being where we need to go, we set an endpoint. 2020 is not there by accident. Everything that we have in place has a 2020 measure in place. And then we backloaded that measure down to where we currently are based on our baseline and said, what do we have to do each year between now and the year 2020 to get to whatever that measurable objective has there. With the graduation rate, it was a 90% graduation rate by the year 2020. Our baseline was 72. So mathematically, obviously, we need to make a 2% gain each year between now and the year 2020. And we're going to do that by showing continuous improvement for all students, higher standards, realigned assessments that actually have meaning and value, and a variety of other implementation strategies to help us along that trajectory. So it's real clear in every one of the goals that are contained in the 4 areas of the plan have those types of learning trajectories in place. Some yet to be totally fleshed out as we continue to develop the plan.
So ultimately, the objective was what was going to happen in 2020, where you wanted to be,
Sure.
and then what it was going to take to get to that on that trajectory to 2020.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of backward design, that you start with the end in mind. Here's where we want to be, and then backload all of your metrics, all of your goals and objectives back to today and say, okay, here's how we want to go about this, and have those annual measures in place so that even throughout the year, but definitely once a year, you reassess. Are we on the right trajectory? Are we making the progress we need? If we're not, what are we going to do about it? And we've built into the department here a system that quarterly I get updates on how we're doing on those measures.
So thinking back to your days as a local school superintendent and a principal, did you have similar plans when you were in Alex City?
Absolutely. When I was appointed superintendent in Alex City, the first function that I conducted was developing a strategic plan. And not a plan that was just a bunch of words on a paper, but things that really, by pulling stakeholders in, this is what we wanted our school system to be. And I'm a firm believer that you have to build in measurable objectives that can be captured so that you can actually judge how you're doing along that trajectory. So it is a mirror somewhat of that, but just on a much larger scale.
You know, in looking at the plan and being here in Montgomery, I was impressed by how quickly this came together. And so I assume you have some staff members here that worked hard and bought into the plan and helped you to create all the parts that we have now.
Sure, but Earl, when you look back, it's if you really look at most of the things that are in that, there are things that class and SSA, school boards, other organizations that we really talked about for a long time. There's several documents out there from those individual entities that talk about these very things. We've just never had a mechanism where it all lived in one place and really provided that direction for the state in public education. And was real careful when we put this together. I'm not a fan of imposing something on local school systems saying that everybody needs to be doing this, because I'm a firm believer. We have 135 school systems now, 1,500 schools. They're all uniquely different. But if we're all working this plan in our own individual way, based on where those systems are individually, then we all win when we do that.
Of course, I've heard you say on many occasions when you were a local superintendent, when you received something from the State Department, you need to do this or those type things, and I think you felt frustrated as a local superintendent.
Just like graduation rate, for instance. If our goal is a 90% graduation rate by the year 2020, we have some school systems who've already exceeded that. So obviously they don't need to be changing what they're doing to try to meet something we've imposed. Now there are some that are far, far away from that. So obviously they need to tag on to this and adopt some of those same things that we know, and the goals and objectives that are in there aren't just dreamed up sorts of things. We've looked at research, we've looked at best practice, we've looked at results, and those were the things that were identified that can actually leverage the results we were looking for.
Okay. In the 4 main priority areas in Plan 2020, can you give us some major takeaways? And let's start with learners. Is there a major takeaway that you would like for folks to to get from the priority of learners?
Sure. And I'll just choose one. There are 4 objectives under learners. And the first one to me is the most important, and it says something to the effect that all students will perform at or above proficiency and show continuous improvement. We've always, under No Child Left Behind and adequate yearly progress, had to be at or above proficiency. But what was missing was show continuous improvement. And while that seems simple, it's actually a pretty profound shift, because what that means is the group of students that I feel like we have underserved the most under No Child Left Behind, unintended, are our very brightest students. So by adding that part to the statement, we are now charged with making sure that all kids are continuing to improve academically, regardless of where they are on the continuum. I share this pretty regularly. The first time we really started fleshing this out and talking about it with educators, a comment was made, well, if we do that, we may actually run out of courses that we currently have to offer. And to that I say, what a great opportunity for us to rethink what we're asking of our children and develop partnerships with others that might have things that are more rigorous than we have to offer.
Of course, back in the day, as a school principal, if you hit the 50th percentile, it didn't matter. That's all we, as a school, we didn't. And one of the good things I think about No Child Left Behind, it made us focus on every kid.
Sure.
And at one point in time, we didn't. In most schools, it wasn't like that.
Absolutely. I was a special ed teacher when No Child Left Behind came into play, and it was absolutely what we needed at the moment. It caused us to look at underrepresented groups, students that weren't getting served. But again, a very unintended consequence. As a result of that, we really began to focus on that group. But if you look at our very brightest students, their achievement over that decade actually decreased. But at the same time, as a state, we continue to make AYP.
Absolutely. All right, let's move next to the another priority area, professionals. Give us one takeaway there.
A big shift that we want to work on, and this is one of those areas where we don't have everything fleshed out yet, because I think this is a real important conversation to have, and we've got to get this one right. The research is very clear that we can buy everything out there that people have to offer to enhance education. We can build the best buildings, we can do all these sorts of things, but the research clearly tells us that the variable that has the most powerful impact on student learning is an effective classroom teacher in a school that's led by an effective leader, instructional leader, in a system that is led by an effective superintendent. Key word there being effective. And what does effective mean? We're right now in the midst of looking at how do we repurpose and redesign the preparation program for teachers to make sure that we're preparing them for the 21st century. We have many programs now that are already changed to a more clinically based model where students that are proposed teachers have more time with real students, with master teachers, to really get the feel of what teaching and learning looks like. But there's a trend nationally that I'm not a big fan of, that the test score in the spring becomes the determinant of effectiveness. We've held off and received some criticism because we haven't jumped on that bandwagon like many other states have, saying that if Earl's students don't show X on the spring test, then he's not an effective educator. I've done this for 35 years, and there's so much more to being an effective educator than just test scores. We want to make this a priority, but we want to make sure we get it right. And that starts with how we recruit people into the system, what it means to become a teacher, what the certification requirements are, what quality mentoring and induction programs look like for teachers. That's crucial. The research is real clear that we lose some of our best and brightest teachers within the first 2 to 3 years because, regretfully, most of those programs have been cut, except in systems that have local funds that can do it. So we know that having effective people doing the work is a game changer. We just need to be real careful, and we're going to spend this year that we're currently in really defining that so we can put resources and support into ensuring that they can be effective.
Okay. Taking us to the next priority area, which is support systems, which we know is very critical.
Oh, it's huge. The statistic I use to get people's attention on this one is last year in the state of Alabama, we served 95 million lunches in Alabama schools. 60% of those were free. So by far the biggest issue to me facing us in public education is poverty. We know that those kids that come to school hungry, that come to school uncared for in terms of their health, food insecurity, just a variety of things, aren't ready to learn. But we also know, I think we know, and we're finding out more and more on day to day, that there are a lot of services out there for those kids and those families, but regretfully, some of them are often disjointed and very difficult for a family that may not have the capacity to know where all those things are, how they access those services. So we've made a real commitment to work, again, individually in local communities with local school systems to identify all the services that are out there for children and how to pull those together so that they're easily accessible based on the individual needs of students. We have 10 pilots going in the state right now with this comprehensive learning support system, and actually just this morning was in a meeting where a system reported out what an aha moment it's been for them to actually pull all those players together. So we want to acknowledge the fact that our kids come to school not ready to learn, and we have some responsibility in meeting those needs.
How about sharing the example that you used with a state group here in town of those at-risk students that maybe couldn't have transportation to get the appointments, but
Sure.
you made the contact here with another state
Sure,
group.
with the Department of Mental Health. You know, we know that adolescent mental health in the state of Alabama is a huge need. We also know that the previous model of how students receive those services is the school personnel would identify the child in need. They would make the referral to the community mental health center, and then we'd rely on the families of these at-risk kids to get them to those appointments. And regretfully, and no reflection on their families, but many of the kids that are at risk actually live in at-risk families. So most of those appointments weren't being kept. So effort was made with the Commissioner of Mental Health to sit down and say, how can we resolve this? And proposed a model where rather than sending the children to them, it's a reverse delivery model of them sending the therapist to the school. It took 5 minutes for that agreement to be worked out. And again, as we're trying to do with everything now, we've now come with that agreement, but local communities sit down with their local mental health and work out programs and service delivery that works for them. There's not a one-size-fits-all, other than we've now broken down that barrier of this is the way it has to be delivered. And that's what these learning supports systems can look like, is breaking down the silos and the turf of the adults to actually serve the needs of children and their families.
And that the old adage, this is the way we've always done it, to
Sure.
continue on.
You know, I'm real careful not to say this too broadly, but I know in the pilot systems where we're doing this right now, it's not requiring more money. It could actually be more cost efficient when you actually identify where all those services are and how to pull them together to serve kids, because you're not duplicating. You're actually more strategic in the delivery of those services, and everybody wins.
And more students are being
More
served.
students get served.
Okay, and the final priority, schools and systems.
Sure. Another area that is exciting for me, what we meant by that is to begin to think about schools and school systems that may not look like the schools or school systems that we've all traditionally become accustomed to. Looking at policies, looking at funding that give and reward and acknowledge innovative programs, creative programs, programs that are non-traditional, moving out of the regulatory mode of a State Department, but more of a facilitator of thinking differently about how to serve children. We're fortunate that our state board has passed a policy now that gives waivers to some of the rules and regulations that we've had in place for years that actually may be a deterrent to doing what's right for kids. And now our state legislature has passed the Alabama Accountability Act that has within it flexibility to state law and budget constraints. So we really are at this unique place in Alabama that I've been doing this for 35 years and would have never had this opportunity, that if I'm leading a school system or a school And I want to do something that's aspirational for my kids, that actually lead them to something much higher than what we normally expect. And I can identify that there's things standing in my way, but I put together a plan that says, we want this for our kids, this is how we're going to measure the success, but we need you to waive these things. We can now do that, which really opens it up to really rethinking. I was in a meeting yesterday with a leadership group down in the Wiregrass area, and they asked, is this message getting out to people? And I said, absolutely it is. But you have to remember that we've told people for at least the 35 years I've been in public education, you have to do it this way. So to shift now and say, it's kind of up to you to come up with the best way you think to do this, and we'll support you to do that, is a hard shift for people to make. So, but we're seeing people go, gosh, we really can do this. And I'm convinced that the answers to most of the challenges we face in public education live within the faculties at the school, if we unleash them to be innovative and creative and partner with the people and resources in those local communities to do that work. We can't direct that from Montgomery. What we can do is support it, ensure that they have the resources to be there, differentiate our support as needed, get real strategically involved in those that aren't stepping forward and doing what's right for kids. I have no patience for systems that aren't doing what's right for kids, and don't mind getting involved there. But for the majority of our systems, turn them loose and just see what innovative things they can create.
What is the one thing you would like for educators to know or remember about Plan 2020?
That it sets a goal of ensuring that every child graduate and that they're prepared, that there's not one way to get there. There's many, many ways to get there. But it all begins with understanding your children, knowing what their interests are, knowing what their aptitudes are, developing as many different ways for them to get there as possible, and go forward. Don't wait on the state to come up with a solution to this. That's not our role.
Right.
I think we've tried to play that role for far too often. But look to us as a partner in this. We have resources that we can offer, differentiated based on the needs of the local school system, but to see this as a new opportunity to really get back to what teaching and learning can look like, embrace our new rigorous standards. I know they're challenging for us right now, but if you really spend some time picking them apart and thinking about where this is going to take our children, and understanding that how we teach within these new standards is really about collaborative, deep thinking, not just regurgitating information, it could be a great environment for the teachers and the kids.
From a public perspective, what's the one thing you want the public to know?
Regretfully, most of the stories that get reported are when there's a bomb threat or a fight or some disaster that happens. I'm in schools once a week. I've been in 2 schools this week. 2 very, very different schools and very different environments.
I saw your post on Facebook, by the way, the pictures on Facebook.
You know, there is so much good that happens in public education. We need to get our public to engage with us and be our voice to share those stories. And yes, I'm a firm believer in acknowledging, yes, we have some areas where we need to improve. We will for always have that challenge.
And accept those.
And accept those challenges, because once you do, then you make a difference. But my goodness, the positive and innovative things I'm seeing in schools right now, and just get those communicated and get community involved in that.
In conclusion, what's the ultimate objective of Plan 2020?
Easiest question you've asked, that every child graduate from high school and that they're prepared for whatever it is they choose to do next.
So in determining success in the end, is that what will determine if this plan is successful?
Absolutely. The first part of that is pretty easy to measure, that they graduate from high school. We'll know that. The only way we'll know the second half of it is when we hear back from them. There's not a test, there's not a this, there's not a that, but to follow them into the next phase of their career, whether that's straight to work or technical school or four-year college or whatever it is, and see if they were successful. And that's why we're going to rely on, and that's why our new partnership with post-secondary and higher ed and business industry is so important. Their feedback to us about the job we did is the measure of success.
Appreciate you taking the time to visit with me today. If you haven't seen the Plan 2020, it's great information. It's easy to read, and I encourage you to give some time to this. Thank you again for your leadership, and we look forward to many successful years to come.
Thank you, Earl.